Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. Stephen, be good and don't open up to anyone but mom and dad. Giving her son final instructions, Camille was spinning in front of the mirror in the hallway. Mommy, don't go, quietly asked the little one and pulled my skirt, attracting attention. We'll be back soon. Well, we will bring guests, said Christopher. Son, and sitting down next to him, put his huge palms on his shoulders. Encouraging squeezed. You're growing up to be a man, so act like one. Sit and watch cartoons. Don't be afraid of anything. Well, enough with him. We're already late. Irritably threw the young woman, adding she lips, fracture, poison, lipstick, and for some reason it was madly annoying how patiently sometimes her husband began to talk to the baby. Christopher was 23 years older than his wife. They married in a hurry, thereby giving many friends and acquaintances a reason to joke that someone had time to jump in the last carriage, so as not to remain in his old age bachelor, who favorably arranged his lost life without a native. In general, Camille was greeted coolly in Christopher's entourage. What was to blame? It was her origins, but also temperament and habits and attitudes were all gone. And while he waved his hand, Camille, and smiled as her son repeated the gesture. The door closed, the key turned in the lock, and Stephen was left alone. Outside the window, it was slowly getting dusk. The three-room apartment, whose windows overlooked the courtyard, closed on all sides by other houses, was gradually filling with walls, and in some places with darkness. The kid did not like the latter and was very afraid of it. But now he could be brave. For in every room there was a light left for him. Stephen still stood for a little while, vaguely hoping that his parents would change their minds and come back, but then reconciled slowly. Protopopov, a large room, which served as both a living room and a nursery. He climbed onto the sofa and took the TV remote, pressed a button, and the screen lighted up, showing something funny and cartoon, and put on the right channel at all before the boy was already at home. But the day we only for a couple of minutes, while mom literally took out the trash. And so Camille, as a housewife on the full provision of her husband, could afford not to give the child to kindergarten. It wasn't even possible. 6-year-old Stephen was panic-stricken by everything unfamiliar. It was difficult to make contact with others, and even more so with adults. He shunned any fuss and moving games, in general, any violations of his usual cozy routine. He was taken to a psychologist, but he found it all age-related. This happens, and it is better to just wait it out. The baby's development is generally progressing as it should. Christopher and Camille could theoretically ask one of the neighbors to look after their son, but decided it was not necessary. They're fussy and worried about themselves. The thing is that they were suddenly invited to visit distant relatives who had just returned from the capital, where they had their own business. In general, these people arranged a large gathering of people wanting to restore blood ties, to return to their roots. Finally, when so much time and effort had been put into making things happen, Christopher hoped that they would help him get a proper job. Not in the capital, of course, but there would be the right connections. For more than 30 years, he had worked as a bricklayer, but recently the construction firm where he worked went bankrupt, and it was not easy to find a new place at his age. Camille is just passionate. How she wanted to sit at home, wiping her son's nose, as she herself put it frankly. I could live like that, Camille dreamed. She was going to be 32 in a year. What had she accomplished? Sometimes she cried quietly into her pillow, and her husband and her nettles night after night without hearing. Camille and her sisters were born in the village to a family, as they said, a lost one. The parents drank. The daughters grew like weeds. When the eldest Camille was 12, they died, despite being taken in by an aunt. Camille had to become a mother to the 4-year-old Emily, and also work in the house and in the vegetable garden. The aunt immediately put her sisters in their place, saying that she would not tolerate freeloaders. Naturally, any higher education was out of the question. only work at the house from 14 until graduation as a saleswoman in a store on weekends, and then full-time. And naturally, all the wages were taken away by her aunt. Camille met her future husband 11 years ago when he came in to buy mineral water and apples. Christopher came to visit acquaintances and also to improve his health in nature. The doctor insisted that if he didn't take care of his vessels properly, he could have a stroke before retirement. They just exchanged a few words. He replied that they were local city folk. Somehow the conversation got going. Christopher told him he'd been divorced a long time ago, so single, alone in his apartment. Camille realized that the absorbent cotton was her chance. They saw each other again and again. The man was touched by the girl's selflessness, her care for her younger sister. He fell in love. He did not delay with the proposal to legalize the relationship in a large apartment, which Christopher's parents still received. There was room for his wife's younger sister. Emily gave him a fatherly feeling. He hoped that the girl could go to university. But Emily's coming of age was barely celebrated. She left home. That's probably all Camille said about her, with her lips pressed together. Christopher was shocked. He'd never offended a girl in any way. It was disconcerting, of course, how the sisters sometimes quarreled violently, and the occasions were petty. But is that a reason to leave home? To live first with some shady acquaintances, and then, I dread to think, to get a job as a dancer in a nightclub. Christopher talks about a truce and assures Emily that he won't let her get hurt. The girl, who became after leaving an independent voyage of an unknown spectacular beauty, said that she simply cannot leave her nephew for his sake, will come to visit and carried fruit kilograms. In winter, she gave him toys, helped him dress for last fall, and generally generously helped with money. Although Christopher assured that they coped because he was proud and it was shameful to accept material help from a girl, preparing to be a daughter, and even earning in this way. Time went by. Stephen watched cartoons, then ate some cookies left for him in the kitchen and drank some iced tea. The little boy thought that it was not so scary to be alone. But then suddenly the light in the apartment suddenly went out, swallowed him. Darkness dissipated only by a ghostly light from the window. As always, it piles up, drag, no wiggle, creeping quietly, thump, thump, snore. The baby was twisting his head and breathing frequently. I wanted to scream, to cry, but it was frightening that if at least there was no sand, those lurking in the dark would rush to him. Mom called softly, listened. Daddy listened again. Somewhere in the bathroom, the pipes slammed. It had happened before, but it sounded different now. Stephen had no doubt that those scary monsters, but already ready to play cat and mouse with him. The kid carefully lowered his legs to the couch, pulled the warm plaid and covered himself with it, leaving it hanging like a cloak. And then what sometimes happens by accident happened. A thing just fell. My mother had put some box on the edge of the shelf, and it, losing its balance, fell. Stephen at that moment was looking out the window. How nice it was. Lots and lots of lights on. That would be to sneak away, so as not to be caught by those who live in the dark. And this noise from the corridor was the last straw for the nerves of the kid. He climbed up on the table, then stood on the table by the window, pulled the handle with all his might. The sashes fell off and the coolness of the October evening poured into the room. The noise of cars started along the road hidden by the houses, and the main thing now was the chase. Saw lights, lanterns, windows of apartments. Stephen had never been so close to open heights in his life, and it made a strange impression on him. There was something mysterious about the freshly opened expanse of twinkling lights, as if you were opening the first page of a picture book. Anticipating, but not knowing exactly what awaited next, the little boy suddenly realized that here from the very windowsill, he was not the least bit afraid of what awaited him in the darkness of the apartment. He sat on the windowsill with his legs out and looked out into the yard, where everything seemed so small. Funny, it was like that for about 5 minutes. The little boy was not distinguished by obedience, even with his parents, but an unfamiliar voice somehow made him do it. Croa froze, staring with wide-open eyes in front of him. "Calm down. Everything will be all right." The window of the room where Stephen was sitting was close to the balcony of the neighboring apartment where the man had just stepped out. His purpose was prosaically to look out into the distance, to breathe the air where it felt like the onset of real winter, to think about his own thoughts. The blackout didn't bother him. By the way, he lit a battery-operated lamp, and then he noticed the baby. It was a short distance from the balcony, so he could reach it. "What's your name?" "My name is John. I'm your neighbor." Stephen answered the boy. "What are you doing here?" "You sit quietly in there, dark and scary. And I'm not coming out of there. It's better, all right. You're not scared. You're calm. You look at me, and it's okay. I'm going to take you in my arms now." "Okay. Why?" "Because you can't sit here, and you can't go in the dark. Right? Aha. Aren't you scared? You didn't move. Look at me, all right." That's when Evelyn and Grandma came back from their walk. The former was an old lady who cared about everything that went on in her yard and her house. And the other one was her terrier dog, and happened to be in the habit of gazing around the house from bottom to top. Evelyn noticed a child in the dark window opening. The old woman gasped, and then screamed in terror. Stephen heard the screams as he fell out of the cozy poo trance that the voice had plunged him into. Suddenly, he realized that there was emptiness below and darkness behind, and he became very frightened. The boy roared and kicked himself, but nothing irreparable happened. The man managed to bend over the balcony and grab the child. And in a moment, he was finally really out of danger from the ninth floor. "You're not crying." He looked into the baby's eyes. John and Stephen nodded. Sobs. "One last time. Let's go inside." Opened the door from the balcony and entered his apartment. Put the boy in the big padded chair and sat down next to him, so that his eyes were level with the child. "So first of all, where are your mom and dad?" "Gone." "Did they leave you home alone with the window open?" "Alone. But I opened it myself." "Why would you do that?" "The light's off. It's dark. It's scary. Lights in the window. Flashlights. But the light will come back. That's what to do with your parents. They've been gone a long time." "Aha. But do you want some water or juice or milk?" "Juice." "Do you have an apple?" Stephen smiled. The apartment John rented was very ordinary, and he did not change anything in it. The modest furnishings had not been renovated for a long time, but in general it was clean and decent. And this young man had recently arrived in the city and could have rented any apartment, but he chose this one because he was lucky, and the apartment was in the building where the right person lived, the person he had long ago sworn to find. Evelyn, who witnessed what had happened, was shocked. Such an event can be discussed for a long time from all sides, and the main thing was that she was the only one who had witnessed it, so she hurried to share it with her best friend, stopping by for a cup of tea. So wait, after listening to the story a second time, because Evelyn loved to repeat herself, she was enlightened by the details of the event. Jenna decided to clarify something. "So what happened in our house? Why didn't you say something before?" "I told you. You should have listened." The old woman was insulted, unwilling to admit the truth. At first, she really did not say where the child was sitting on the window. She was just emotionally functioning with impressions, the baby. That man was taken away by a stranger, and we're sitting here like a fool, drinking tea. So he's not exactly a stranger. He's a neighbor, a decent, well-mannered young man. "Do you know who she is?" "Well, polite," Evelyn said, as if that would be the end of it. "Holds the door. Woman doesn't smoke. Probably a student or a businessman you talk to, and you'll know everything. So let's go to him. What a stranger's kid. He saved me. Well, it's only the parents that get Andy back now." Meanwhile, Camille and Christopher were on their way home. The visit was a little disappointing. It turned out that no job could be offered to Christopher. They promised he would. maybe where such valuable personnel is needed, but it was clear they'd just feed him breakfast. Camille's mood was spoiled by something else. In the guest was a young married couple, peers in the RKK, taking between them and shining love Camille. It was physically unpleasant to look at them. It emphasized the fact that she herself had married purely out of convenience. But how was married life? Robert asked. He was an old friend of Christopher's. Back in high school, they had agreed that they both couldn't stand algebra and had a passion for Dumas. Slowly, what if we really mean it? Look, we've known each other for 100 years. You don't think I can tell? I'm fine, really. Your son's growing up. He looked at Camille, who was helping the lady of the house put the salads on the table. When I saw her, I fell in love with her. Would you believe it? No, I didn't think so. Just looking at me with that age difference. I get it. I added a frown. It was hard to get it out of myself that she got married because I could offer to provide a proper home. And I don't believe it. She's young. Yes, you see everything so beautifully when you're young. Remember when we went to Sicily in 2000? What vineyards of sausage there. And the women. If only we had stayed. Timo shook his head. It was a completely different world. Shook his head Christopher. He who's that distant, seemingly already almost historical past imprinted in his memory not only sultry moment pictures, Mediterranean pastoral. Then he and Robert dashingly rushed to earn money abroad. However, as many believe that already their dreams will come true. And even at first fortune smiled on Robert's specialty. Got him a job at a factory making olive oil. To adjust the work of updated equipment, Christopher was invited to repair masonry wine cellars belonging to a sick man. And as they told the head of the mafia, the one turned out to be not a pathos bloodsucker, but as if a normal man. Salaries he did not delay and even invited to make a table with him, which is forever remembered Christopher. Great cheeses were served. Giovanni Bianchi amazed Christopher with his knowledge of Russian, and told that he learned it for the sake of his first love, beautiful Elizabeth, who was the daughter of the director of a large department store. But the author of the trip with his father met his bursting love, forced the beautiful girl to renounce her own family and enter the house of the groom, trusting him completely. The lavish wedding was played. But on the happiest day, when Giovanni had a son and his beloved died, Christopher also told about his family. His father and grandfather were professors. They were involved in psychology and psychiatry, studying controversial topics such as hypnosis, personality programming on a subconscious level. Christopher disappointed them by refusing to continue the family business. He wanted to work with his hands to create something reliable for centuries, so he chose the craft of masonry. Christopher plunged into memories and does not come out of their public hour, but in some places prickly disturbing fog for a long time, even when we had already said goodbye to everyone and moved back with his wife. Let's go to the zoo as a family, unexpectedly suggested Christopher as we approached the house. It's been a long time since we've been out together. We'll eat ice cream and tease the monkeys. Camille was silent because she pushed with her tongue. Christopher realized that his wife was in a bad mood. It's interesting how the tycoon must have watched cartoons for a year. Again, the man tried to diffuse the atmosphere and looked up. The lights had already been fixed, the windows in the apartment were glowing, and the window was open. Camille exhaled, holding his wife's hand in his. The woman also looked up, startled, forgot how to breathe, and his gaze fell down to the asphalt. The windows are empty, son. They rushed together to the entrance, but almost in the face did not hit the door, from which came out 100, nodding sticks among themselves old ladies. Which ones came back? Then the parents, I lowered myself on them, Evelyn Blood, and turned away, miming with my lips. There's nothing wrong with your child. Hurriedly calmed, sick, and kind of ready to faint parents. Saved. What? What happened? Camille whispered. Where's my son? He bellowed. The old ladies looked at each other. At your neighbor's. He took him off the window. He took him off the window. Did you hear what happened? You interrupted Evelyn. I was walking home to the store. In the morning, I noticed that the kefir was expiring, so it would be evaluated. And what do you think? They took the kefir. I had to take it. I need it for my stomach. Oh, you chased Jenna away, realizing the retreat could go on for a very long time. In general, your son neighbor to the right on the balcony went out and saw ours that sits on the windowsill. So he took it down to his place, took it away, just like that. Christopher silently rushed forward. Camille rushed after him, rather after her son. There you go and thank you nothing, waved her hands Jenna. The door knocked and rang at the same time. John some time ago and the boy puzzle multicolored cube went to open. You had my son, it felt like my heart was going to jump out of my chest. Which son raised his eyebrows questioningly, not letting him pass the threshold. Stephen, the little boy. Camille's voice trembled. We were told that you saved him. What do you mean? Yes, he stepped back, letting him pass and pointing with his hand into the room. The parents rushed to the child. Stephen was terribly happy to see them, but didn't understand why. Why mom is crying, and dad is not crying, but mumbling something affectionately. I don't know how to thank them. When the first emotion subsided, Christopher turned to John. Thank you. We were told how it was from the street. From the street, a neighbor saw Camille pick up. Thank you. Don't mention it. John brushed it off. What could have been done differently? It's just that I went out on the balcony for a minute and saw a boy sitting on the windowsill. That will never happen again. John smiled at the head of Stephen's arms. Thank you again. And what's your name? John. Thank you. You're a neighborly visitor. We haven't seen you before. I just moved in. Renting. There were more thank yous. Finally, we went into the hallway. A toy. It was Stephen's father's deadline. What toy? Didn't get it. While the boy was here, I let him play, smiled John, holding out a cube. If you don't mind, I can give it to him. I used to play it myself. No, I don't mind, Christopher replied, and thought they were awfully lucky to have a neighbor. When the door closed behind the family, John sighed as he finally had a chance to be himself again. Back in the room, he sat on the floor in the lotus position and began to breathe in a measured manner. He needed to regain his equilibrium and energy balance because today he saw up close the man he had been searching for so long. This man had changed so much, but the eyes he would never forget. If it wasn't for years of training and discipline, he would have barely looked into them and screamed again, returned to the nightmare he had only miraculously survived, would have gotten lost in the madness. John held his breath. As far as he had the strength, and exhaled sharply, as if gluing himself firmly together from the shards that had once shattered this man's entire being. But now, coincidentally, he was one step closer to realizing his plan. How fortunate that the boy had climbed up to the window. Now it would be much easier for him to enter this family the next morning. Camille woke up in a disgusted mood. First of all, she remembered that she had left the child alone, and she felt ashamed. And that was not the kind of person Camille liked to be. Secondly, she knew that the airbag was slowly melting away, and my husband hasn't gotten a job yet. So what to do? They don't starve. Enough at the aunt's place. She's had enough. Of course, there was an option to ask Emily, but my little sister will start lecturing about child rearing, so she'd understand. But I had to go to the store. There for a long time, wandered between the shelves, because I forgot the shopping list made the day before yesterday. Good afternoon. A familiar voice sounded, but it seemed even more beautiful today. It was John, too, with a cart, where Camille had a quick eye for fresh pigeon tenderloin, a huge piece of cheese and chocolate. And I felt ashamed of myself. And I felt a little ashamed of myself. With a stocked pasta and soup set of chicken and potatoes, a pack of cheap yogurt for my son. Hello, replied, shifting her gaze to the guy. I wonder how old he is. Even younger than me, pricked the thought, and Camille smiled at the girl and said she had a charming smile. And why did the woman think I got Christopher not like this tall, muscular, with piercing and green eyes, correct facial features, sensual lips. One more look at the hand, no ring. Somebody's lucky to have a son. Poor thing was so frightened, wasn't he? I wondered. Yeah, he's fine, she shrugged. I think he'll quickly forget the bad things. Next to such a wonderful mom, John smiled. But Camille thought that if she were an ice cream maker, she would definitely have Rostic's class lying down. I really feel so bad about leaving him alone. You see, we were called to visit with a baby to go uncomfortable, and there is no one to watch. John nodded, put a set of cakes in the cart. I understand. I was raised by my father alone, and I was often alone. He believed it could raise me to be a man. He seems to have succeeded, Camille replied thoughtfully, noting that John was dressed expensively. Perhaps the watch is not a fake. I wonder what a man is. Forgotten in the apartment, which was difficult to publish because of its deplorable condition. We approached the cash register, and the cashier punched Camille's goods. That'll be $450. The woman put her card to the terminal. It doesn't go through, the cashier said, and added, in a horribly inappropriate way, insufficient funds. Camille at that moment understood very well the meaning of the expression, shame makes you want to fall through the ground. Sorry, wrong card, I guess. Burked nervously from the bag, where there was no other card. The cash was left at home. You'll be there soon. There are people waiting here. Some man in the back of the line was indignant. John held out his hand and put his card to the terminal. Oh, come on. Camille pulled her eyes out. Thank you for your purchase. We look forward to seeing you again. The cashier glanced at John, already punching in his purchases, and then at Camille. She felt like she'd told them the same thing for nothing. Only I'm so embarrassed, and I'll just return the cash I forgot at home, she blushed. So hot her cheeks were. Camille walked out of the store with John. Would I be uncomfortable taking money from a woman for helping out of the goodness of my heart? He grinned, his eyes downcast. The license doesn't cost a trifle. Isn't that heavy? The 4-pound bag of pasta was indeed pulling unpleasantly down. Camille took it just because it was a good discount. They'd be enough for a couple of months. I guess we were just lucky to meet, said as we walked down the little alley, K, which, illuminated by my meager fall sun, shone red leaves like flaps of silk. Every year, for some reason, these trees were the ones that shed their leaves later in the year. How long will you be staying with us? I mean, we didn't think anyone would ever rent that apartment. It's just that there are some old memories of this town and this street. But the present is often so different from what you expect in the past. I think I'll stay here for a couple months, and then go home. Where, pardon me, I'm probably minding my own business. Why is that? It's always good to talk to someone nice. For now, my home is in Austria. But who knows? We walked on in silence. We parted on a landing. Say hello to your son. He's brave and smart beyond his years, John said. Goodbye. Once again, Camille blushed. If it had happened to someone else, she would have shrugged. But it was different with her. Camille was surprised at how John was. The little sister came back and was walking home. Her little sister came upon her. Christopher told me everything. How can you be so irresponsible? Emily waved her hands. Camille rolled her eyes, not hiding how fed up she was with her sister. In fact, at a tender age, she'd adored Emily. Left her tidbits, covered her with the warmest blanket. She used to weed her aunt's vicious garden bed. But later Camille realized that Emily was annoying because she was too free-spirited. By the fact that she had been fed all these years. And she says, how does a princess leave home? Dancing and earning enough to rent an apartment, dressing fancy. But it ended well. Camille tried to fight back by developing purely by accident. I hope you learned your lesson. And look at you. The woman couldn't stand it. For several minutes, the sisters silently glared at each other. Camille gave in first, sighed, and smiled shyly. I'm sorry. I was just worried. Yes, it's awful that it happened that way. We'll change the bolts on the windows. We'll figure something else out. And until Stephen's old enough to make sense, we'll never leave him alone again. So we'll make up, said Emily, who just couldn't stay angry with her sister for long. And the next days went even as if better than expected. But then something happened. One evening, Camille and Christopher left the house again, but this time leaving their son with Emily. Those same relatives agreed to help with the work. And Camille accompanied Christopher as moral support. We also talked to Sam, an acquaintance of theirs in this town. He owned a firm, building cottages, houses. In general, everything in vacancies Mason as if it was free. They came back, buoyed with hope. In a couple of days, Christopher could go on a trial order. True, he had to spend a couple of days out of town in a cottage village. But that was a small thing. We let the bus go again, because some drunken guy came asking for more bread. So we had to walk the rest of the way. Nothing. The new housing estate will be built, and we will have more transportation. Christopher encouraged his wife. Camille was not impressed by the prospects and continued to look around fearfully. It was unpleasant for her to walk an extra stop in bad weather through the park, then past some unfinished store. And then out of a doorless doorway shining with an alarmingly otherworldly darkness came two types, one of them spitting through his teeth. Walking, added the second, and grinned. And the third type appeared was behind the backs of the spouse, blocked the way to retreat. "You, Christopher," screamed frightened Camille, clinging to her husband. "Excuse us, let us pass. Where are we going?" The first man stepped closer. "We don't know each other." Christopher spoke firmly, but apparently not at all convincingly. "Not for the likes of these guys. Let me through. Otherwise, what am I, Grandpa?" The second man repented and jokingly, but palpably poked Christopher with a fist in the shoulder. "Do you have a problem?" A familiar voice sounded. Camille did not know she could feel such joy. Turning sharply, she saw John under the light of the only street lamp. He seemed to radiate calmness, the calmness of a tiger, capable of destroying any opponent with a single swing of his paw. "And who the hell are you?" Valerius bellowed, the type that stood closer to John, and ridiculously swung his fists and rushed forward. Camille come again with her husband, but hardly forgot about his existence. John literally threw him over himself, then hit the second attacker hard, and the third simply backed away. And then those who were defeated jumped up, and all just ran away. "Thank you." That's all Christopher could manage to get out of himself. And suddenly John staggered backwards and landed on a pole. "John!" Camille exclaimed, rushing toward him. "Are you hurt?" She touched his face lightly, and he lifted his chin, looked into his eyes. Camille felt as if she were falling into the sea, woven from the chaita and the charms of the marsh grass. "Just a scratch," answered, though the eyebrow above her eye was cut short. Apparently, this first one was proving to be a truly dangerous opponent, even for one such as John. "Yes, not so much as," bellowed at the confused spouse. "She's not well." "I'm fine, really, right? I'm not worth your concern." "Camille, I just have a headache, and I'm dizzy." "You may have a concussion," Christopher said, walked over so his neighbor could lean on him. "It'll have to be soon. I think it'll get better soon." "Have you been in a lot of fights like this before?" asked Christopher. Personally, he did not approve of forceful methods of solving issues in any case. "My father's a lawyer." John didn't approve of it. "But sometimes there are cases when you just cannot pass by." "Let's get this wound cleaned up." Camille gasped. "Put some tea down. Have a drink." Christopher was more than happy to hand over the neighbor to the doctors, because Camille was not even a nurse, but from what happened, his nervous patriarchy. That, however, rode off at age and did not argue. Without Adventures reached the apartment of the spouses. "Who is it? What happened?" Met a small company, dumbfounded Emily, our neighbor John, which Stephen saved by putting tea, please, food and first aid kit, curtly said everything she knows Camille needs. "Stephen is asleep, by the way," frowned Emily and went to do as told. sent first to the bathroom for a dressing down with Camille, and then planted in the kitchen filled with tea and clubs. John was speechless and visibly embarrassed by the attention to his own person. Emily was under the impression of how complicated life turns out to be. 2 miraculous rescues by one neighbor in 1 week, a world record. Perhaps this mysterious neighbor made a double impression on her. Yes, handsome, even too well-mannered intellectual, aged a generation, probably. But there was something about him she didn't like. And yet show with the doctor, said Camille. In farewell, when the neighbor went to his room only because you insist on it, smiled and again met gaze intently, deeply, to the most secret corners of your soul, sweet dreams. And it was surprising. But Camille slept beautifully. She was dreaming some sweet nonsense that young May fools who don't know how unfair the real world is. But not a 30-year-old woman married without love. In this dream, Camille was riding Bigfoot, with a cotton candy dress on her arms and butterflies, with golden wings, singing that dreams can come true. Can you believe we were outside the toy department? Christopher, a couple days later, when he came back from the store he went to with Stephen. And he didn't beg for anything this time at all. He's getting older and realizing that he's done being naughty. If only Christopher had been a little more attentive and Camille hadn't been so immersed in sadness for tons of her everyday life. True, now diluting them with flashes of thoughts of the neighbor coming in as inconsequential. They would have noticed that Stephen had become less interested in all his toys at all, for he now had one and his most favorite, a puzzle cube given by his neighbor. On this day in the evening, John just showed up on their doorstep with a small basket containing exotic fruit, cheese, and chocolates, and said it was just a gesture of thanks for being a first aider. Naturally, he was invited to a tea party. Yay, Uncle John, exuberantly rejoiced Stephen, jumping after his guest in the kitchen to play with me. Only if you obey your mother, smiled the neighbor. I promise, with the purest of intentions, replied Stephen. Of course you will play, sighed Camille, who was mortified by this picture. Christopher said nothing. It was strange to him. However, there was no time to deal with anxieties, and it turned out to be tedious. It was time to go to work. Christopher packed his things, kissed his wife, stroked his son's head warmly, and said goodbye to Emily, who promised to come and help more often. Well, now tell me what you had in common with him and your sister when your husband was already far away, and he himself was sweetly in his proper day's sleep. What do you mean? The piercing image always frightened Camille a little. And then years ago, she guessed her sister wasn't marrying for love. Well, he's a friend of ours. Shrugged her shoulders at the windowsill. Comes by sometimes. Stephen likes to play with him. That's all. What do you want? Taking less robbed, Camille began to humor the soil in the pot. He's a nice, seemingly poor man, but he's open. And then for some reason she took and laid out to her sister the incident in the store. Emily listened silently, only her eyes grew darker and darker. Fool, he shouted, so that Camille recoiled. She flew out into the hallway, hastily threw on a sheepskin coat, pulled on stiletto boots and rushed away. Immediately, however, there was an insistent knock at the neighboring door. "Hello," answered John, who opened the girl's door. He didn't like the way she looked at the stairs. He could read well, too well. Here Emily abruptly held out some bills to him. "What is this? Paying back a debt? You paid for my sister." "Thank you. Of course you don't have to." John smiled. It was. And that smile, that special smile, worked perfectly. But this maiden with the fury of a gazelle came to Leo. Only her eyes narrowed dangerously in response. "We don't need charity." Eve interrupted. "Will you take it? And if I don't?" Looks like there's a new player in the game. John didn't expect to have any problems with this girl, but he suddenly started to like it. "What do you want? What about you? Why are you meddling in our family?" The door next door is ajar. One of the neighbors was attracted by the loud voices, and I didn't want my sister to overhear anymore. Anything can happen. Come in, we'll talk over coffee. A good chin tuck and squeezed past her into the apartment. Emily was determined. She wanted to find out from John if he had a woman, why he'd moved in at all, and if his relationship with her sister smelled of flirtation. Except that conversation didn't happen. John parried. He gave such a florid answer to any question that when you tried to understand it, it came out that she herself was a fool and spoke nonsense. But he did tell me something about working as an analyst. Always brought back nostalgia from his childhood. He was charming. He was outspoken. Emily spent 300 hours at his place, and when she came out, she couldn't breathe in the crisp, frosty air. Yeah, her head felt kind of heavy. It felt like she was slipping in a guide, and only now she was waking up. The girl squeezed her eyes shut and winced hard to the point of pain. This is crazy. She'd gone to see him, hadn't she? And how come she'd taken a liking to him? Why does it seem like he's definitely a nice guy, yet it felt so strangely soul-scraping, like something was being put down? But one thing was definitely worth recognizing. John has a stunningly beautiful voice that you want to listen to forever. Maybe that's what sirens would sound like if they were men. His voices are special not only because of the emerald-colored malachite, but because of how catchy they are. It's as if his every word is typed into his brain underneath them. Meanwhile, Christopher arrived at the cottage village of New Lynxes, where he found himself immediately immersed in the already forgotten processes. And then, behind the rumble of work, behind the unsuccessful creation of something that can please more than one generation, he was flooded with memories, and he willingly succumbed to them. So it was easier not to think about the fact that the beloved truth, the most beloved woman in the world to him, cooled, and supposedly an urgent case comes along and slips out of his hands. Camille became more thoughtful, and also went to the hairdressers for something, although before she was content to color her sisters from home. Which, by the way, is very good for the family budget. Lying on his bed one evening, Christopher was suffering from insomnia. It had happened to him before. And then a bell rang from the depths of his memory. What if I tried what? Had his father and grandfather taught him? Not that they were such masters at fighting insomnia, but there were special techniques for working with the mind. But then Christopher came to his senses and called himself crazy. These aren't toys. And in general, it was better to stay away from all this, as he realized once dearly. With that, Christopher fell asleep, and in his dream he saw shards of the past. Then he was still young, walking through the garden with Don Bianchi, and listening to him. And the Italian was talking about his son being the only heir growing up. It's strange. The boy has nightmares and strange fantasies of running away from home. He believes he lives among some evil sorcerers. Naturally, Giovanni takes him to the doctors, but we don't want to expose the child to their method. Then we talked about Christopher's life, and he bragged that his hypnotist acquaintance even said that he supposedly had a talent. And that's when Giovanni asked Christopher for a delicate favor. He said he didn't want his problems and rumors to spread. The risk is great. If he finds a master in such a specific matter, in his environment. That's why he needs science, Christopher. And Giovanni also offered a reward so generous that Christopher didn't believe it at first, much later at home. With this money, buying a car, a foreign car, the latest model, and trying to start a business, Christopher felt uncomfortable. It seemed to him that this money was not good dirty. And the last thing Christopher saw before waking up with a scream that made the other workers jump up in the room allotted to the crew was him. Giovanni led him over to the artificial grotto, where a beagle puppy was playing with a dog near a statue of Mars. "The boy is my son Alberto," Giovanni said. He looked to be about 6 years old, no more. The child was laughing, but how the laughter was cut short when he noticed his father grabbed the puppy by the collar and froze himself like a marble statue. His eyes were a huge green. Meanwhile, at the Christopher house, the changes continued. Camille thought about what she needed and, more importantly, could go out to work. The thing is that while walking with Starapova, she noticed that he did not shun other children. He himself approached the kids and asked to play. and to make sure they accepted him, he offered to share his brand new truck with them, transformed into a spaceship. Another time was in the country. They were in a bakery with Nika. Suddenly, Stephen said he was big and wanted to buy his own pie with jam. "Are you going to go to the salesman's aunt?" his mom asked him, taking some money out of her purse. Aha! After this incident, Camille wanted to cry. Is her son really becoming an ordinary kid? On this day, even with Emily on the wave of her maternal delight, she spoke calmly, without the usual barbs. Her sister, by the way, had a lot to share. After that incident with the return of money, she changed her attitude to John, and he no longer seemed so suspicious. She'd even stopped by to see him. Why? Camille finally saw her, because why did it suddenly become unbearable that John started spending time with Emily? No, he hadn't forgotten about her. She even asked him to fix a shelf in the kitchen. He did it, but still couldn't a sissy all posh and leave her alone. Better at your club. Look for a man, dumped, and through your teeth. What do you want? You're married. And then you've seen those men at the club. They only want one thing. So you like John? She turned sharply to her sister. She sang tensely. What the hell are you talking about? I'm talking. Emily shook her head. I don't like anything. It's just that my friends over there even went to the movies. Well, congratulations. Make sure you don't try to shade the pop roots. So we should go. I've got a husband to remember, and I'm gonna make cutlets for him to eat when he gets here, Camille said, and she left so fast that Stephen barely had time to run after his mom. True, took it as a game and was happy. Camille missed her husband, although until a couple of days ago, as if in secret from herself, as if dictated by her darker half, she had even rejoiced at his departure, because it was possible to shake freely. No, she could not say that Christopher was a domestic tyrant by any means. She couldn't even recall an instance where he'd made a single scene of jealousy. A husband was just too bland. But now his rustling was sorely missed in the house. Christopher moved loudly, and his yet infused all sorts of insignificant phrases with which the ordinary family life is filled like a bird's forest. That evening, Camille burned the cutlets, had to throw out a full pan. The doorbell sounded the annoying last straw, and the fact that it was a neighbor at the door made Camille look furious. Good evening. You're me. What's up? I thought you asked to come in. He looked confused. He was so innocent and defenseless now. You said the faucet was leaking. Yes, of course, come in with that technical nuisance. Camille could have handled it herself. It just needed a little tweak. But the day before Emily told her about the relationship, it turned out to be the perfect excuse to see John. 5 minutes worth of business. She smiled, ducking away from the screen. Are you in a hurry? Bah, not really. If you don't have time to deal with me, then just say so, and I'll beat you to it. I got the look of a delinquent puppy. Just what is it with my sister? With Emily? I don't know what you're talking about. Are you two dating? It was tactless and stupid for a married woman to approach that man. But Camille was carrying on. No, you're right. Emily, your sister, and I have to be completely honest. Yes, she's made it clear more than once that she cares for me. She's an amazing girl, smart, beautiful, generous. I get it. Spit. But I don't think it's gonna work out, because I am. Let's just drop the subject. Okay, the faucet's fixed. It was obvious the guy was in a hurry to leave, but Camille blocked the way, caught his gaze like a shooting star in the palm of her hand, and sank back into it. I can't be with her because I feel something more for another woman. But it's wrong, unacceptable, because she's unfree. She belongs to another. The quiet words fell in Camille's mind like river pebbles into the water that generates diverging circles. There are trusts that must be closed until you decide to open them all. Finished with a strange phrasing that Camille also missed. Well, I gotta go. I'll see you around. She woke up from a semblance of a trance when the door had already closed behind her neighbor. She went back into the kitchen and sat by the window. For a long time, she watched the light from the lanterns being lost in the deepening snowstorm. Winter came, fell unexpectedly on the city. And then she dropped her head on her folded hands and cried. I can't go on like this. Emily plumped down on a leather sofa in a relatively quiet to me for the rhythm of the glowing lights in the corner of the nightclub. One of the dancers pulled her neck, awkwardly doing the cobra dance, and I didn't have to replace her. Hello, an extra shift and a willingness to have a nervous breakdown that even a generous raise wouldn't compensate for. Problem? Asked Rick, sitting down. Here, this 19-year-old programming genius was a regular at the club, because here, as he said himself, a unique atmosphere in which under the rhythms of Flash, you can qualitatively immerse yourself in work. But it was also here, and you'd find a client who needed something sweet done. Rick was known as a master of protection, valuable to his clients' files from websites from being hacked and stolen. But he was also said to be a hacker craftsman. But this guy himself is out of the blue and perpetually comradely, and has a toothpick between his lips. I deny all speculation. He said there are 1,001 legal ways to solve it. It's all about knowing where and what to look for. This one, raising his hand, Emily twirled it above his head. My whole problem is, why do I get sciatica by the time I'm 30? So go away, where do I get paid like this? And then I'm good at dancing, young Mila. So you use what nature has given you, smart girl. The main thing is not to waste it all. What about my family? What can I take from them? They're not so bad. They're normal. The girl took off her platform sandals and started kneading her feet. But my neighbor doesn't like that ex. He's kind of cloudy and sweet to me. You think he's a bad guy. I can't figure out why. Maybe the bad guy wants what's mine, unless he wants to squeeze me. But I don't think so. I mean, they're not lonely old people. They're people with a lot of acquaintances and stuff. No, it's something else. I just don't know who I'm talking to, but I'm not myself. It's like I'm overheating in the sun and my head's melting. You want me to find out about him? Can I? Are you awake? Emily stopped, shook her finger under Rick's nose without dragging me into her dark business. Just give me his picture and everything you know. I'll see what I can do. Since when do you moonlight as a private investigator? But I consider it a compliment for my muse to go away in a couple days. Christopher was pleased, so much so that he even started humming to himself from time to time. This internship not only came to an end, but also ended so successfully that the bosses immediately offered a new job, and even with good pay. There were, of course, some difficulties associated with it, but she decided that she talked to his wife, and together they will solve everything. Welcome back. Camille hugged him when he was back home. And where did you ask? In general, before with his son always ran out to meet him, and he did not step a step. Needed a lot of attention. He watches cartoons. Dad arrived. The kid came out into the hallway, looked at his father. Well, go to the grandmother. Came Christopher opens his arms for a hug game, which the son adored. Always Mishka will catch you, take you out of town, beyond the rivers. Stephen grimaced and roared loudly. Mommy chase uncle away. You're not my daddy. And he ran back into the room. Marveling, marveled Christopher. Son, Stephen, have you been gone long? He must have forgotten somehow. The little one still shook his head. Camille, he never did. Even when I went to my parents in the country for a month, he came back with a beard. It was last year, remember? He recognized it right away. What's wrong with him? But fortunately, Stephen in an hour already recognized Papa was lured out from under the table guests, and the family reunited, as it should be. How are you doing without me? Fine. Oh, I don't mean that. Camille was embarrassed, but Christopher had already gotten gloomy. Waiting. Missed you, of course. I mean, we were good. This is where I redecorated a little bit. She pointed to the pendulum wall clock and the new tall. Don't get distracted, okay? We're on a tight budget. I've been offered a job, by the way. I'll only get paid at the end of the construction project. That'll be 4 months from now. I'd like to ask for an advance, of course, But who knows? Speaking of work, I can go out too. Stephen will go to kindergarten like a normal child. She interrupted her husband. And Camille told her husband about the wonderful changes in the baby. From strangers is no longer frightened, more inquisitive, became inquisitive, and just at home capricious stopped. Used to sit for hours and dive into his puzzle. This cube is colored, and silently fiddles with it. And you mean the one that the neighbor gave? Christopher frowned. Camille nodded. He came by. Well, the neighbor does. While you were away to fix some things around the house. But he likes to play with him anyway. You know what's annoying? Suddenly, Christopher slams a cup on a saucer, and it almost breaks. Stop it, you know. It's not normal. Stop it, you know. It's not normal. Said in syllables and loud enough for old gossipy Evelyn to hear on the first floor. A strange man comes into my house like he's my own. My son. My son, you see, has grown fond of playing with him. You see. Monitoring. I've had enough of this Brazilian soap opera. I'm not leaving here again. And you know what? That Camille was holding onto a stool. She's got her hand clutched in the city of her robe. As if its cozy softness could have anything to do with a pissed-off husband. I was offered a job with accommodation, 100+ kilometers away, but they'll pay well. People are reliable. They won't cheat. And here I think, I do not want to leave my wife and son alone. Not wanting them, all sorts of neighbors staggered. So you're coming with me. That's it. I call and say I agree about the family. I say the day after tomorrow, kids. But no kids for me. But you're my wife. I'm all yours. I brought you into the world. I've forgotten, so remember. He banged his fist on the table and left the kitchen. Camille froze. In all the years of their marriage, Christopher had never raised his voice to her. This was the first scandal that made her feel small, alone, and betrayed for nothing. Her husband's Camille didn't say anything. She simply silently cleared the table, put her son to bed, and ducked under the covers on the marital bed herself. Christopher read a little before going to bed and turned off the earpiece. Good night. He tossed dryly. Good night. Camille decided that he would never see her lightly again, because someone who suspects a wife who has given up everything in her life for the sake of her family like that is just not deserving. The next day, Camille calmly talked to Christopher, having learned all the details. It turned out that the spouse was entrusted to order the Mountain Lake Sanatorium, which was not an easy sanatorium, but a place where guests were offered health rest of elite class. Not so long ago, they finished the restoration of one of the parts of the building. And now, to give it an exquisite, fenced-in final look was lacking only good masons. In general, the immediate superiors of Christopher did not welcome employees traveling to the place of work with their families. But it turned out that the policy of the owners of Mountain Lake is such that the staff working there for long periods of time at will can settle with their families in small cottages, standing at some distance from the main building. And these were not cottages, not anything but decent houses, comfortable even for families with children. What am I going to do there? Camille grimaced. The same as being a housewife here. Personally, he put a lot of things into the term housewife, including the ability of a woman to keep quiet and obediently follow her husband, who makes important and, of course, correct decisions. There's also something that employees can use the pool, go skiing. There are mountains nearby. I see, Camille replied. And by the look on her face, Christopher, in turn, realized that she would probably comply. But she goes a great many ways to express her displeasure. You think about what you need to take on the road, and pack slowly. Genius idea, Camille, for rustling in the hallway dressed. I'll go to the store on the way. I'll think about it. Thank you, honey, for making up your mind for a stupid woman. What's the whole family gonna do? As Camille stepped out of the driveway, she tilted her head. The thick snow fell, Lebbeusy flakes, saddled on her face, secretly mingled with the tears flowing against her will. How much did she hate her husband at that moment? Would just take him and divorce him. Camille paused If ever she knew a snowflake caught on her lips a bad rotten thought. Never had such a thing crossed her mind. Ask her who had before about it. She'd explain that she hadn't thought of it. Because they had a family. Because in her youth, when it fell to her to take care of her younger sister, because she had no idea how it was even possible to exist, what she called, autonomously outside of status. Christopher's wife. He was her pillar of support, the one who solved all her worries. Camille lived a quiet, peaceful life. Of course, sometimes she wanted more passion, something special, romantic, as in the movie show. Yes, and the income would not hurt, so as not to be happy about the points that came to the savings card supermarket basket of delicious and healthy food for the whole family. But she was used to that. There was reality, and there was that other thing, belonging to dreams, as if another Camille. The woman thought about everything and walked slowly, looking under her feet, scraping at the snow beneath her feet. Should I buy new boots? Camille thought. Well, let her be angry. Eva himself said he would make a good living, which means she has the right to go into a fake queue to feel better about herself through shopping. Oops. Didn't notice when she ran into a passerby. Foot led, dented, taken in the road overnight to a treacherous crust of ice. And Camille snatched from behind this very passerby, clutched, and they collapsed together into a snowdrift. No mistake. Fences. Camille suddenly realized they were face to face, so that their noses were literally touching. It turned out to be John. He was the one who had been knocked down by a passerby and was now lying underneath her in the snow. I'm sorry, I'm fine. Oh, I'll be right back. Oh, what is it? John aggravation rose and pulled himself up, giving her a hand. The woman started to grow her down jacket. I'm so clumsy, and lost my hat, the neighbor added, handing over the snow-covered headdress. Sorry again, I'm not myself today. There are days when everything is wrong. There was once a rush to the store. It's not an emergency. Would you like to get dry and warm? Yeah, I gotta get home. I like Camille. We'd better have a cup of coffee. Let me make it up to you. I should have looked in front of me. He smiled charmingly. And it seemed to Camille that if she didn't agree to it now, she'd turn into a block of ice. In the cafe, they sat at a table with a view from the window. The receptionist's grandmother kindly pointed out a rack near the heaters where outerwear could be hung instead of a closet. Drinks were served, more pastries for her and a salad for him. More unexpected than ever, she asked about the one that Camille right now would be glad to forget. Let's just say getting serious amnesia. What do you mean? I'm probably being horrible, not tactful, but we haven't seen each other in almost a week. We just had a fight and broke up. There was nothing between us, and now there's nothing at all. Oh, I'm sorry, Camille said. But the news is a bit of a sunshine. I saw her yesterday too, and she brought some stuff, some leaf lettuce to grow on the windowsill for vitamins. She didn't say anything about you, but she looked fine. And we met, and our eyes met. He reached forward and covered her hand with his. What's bothering you? You can trust me. And Camille confided in him about her husband finding a job, how they had a fight, and how it didn't hurt. Apparently, I'm going to have to go away for a few months. Sometimes you have to resign yourself to fate, John said thoughtfully. Do you really think so? With the indignant hope of a negative answer. Camille asked, who knows? Sometimes you have to do what you want to do and just see where it takes you. As for your husband's decision, I wouldn't want to ruin the strong, loving loyalty of a family of mutual understanding, trust, and love. So I'm stepping aside, but I'm sticking around. After that, we talked some more on neutral topics and finally parted on the way home. Camille did go into the store and returned from the doorstep for the territory. The story that she was sold expired sausage, that's why while she was arguing, returned the goods, exchanged for fresh ones, wrote complaints. That's why she was delayed. Christopher was already packing and listened to his wife without much interest. He was not in the mood at all while talking to Camille, but he was sure that being away from the usual daily routine, and especially away from the neighbor, all this will definitely benefit her. and she will become his well-acquainted. Olenka and affectionate, quiet and grateful for all he had done for her. Returning to his room, John stood under a hot shower for an hour, and then though the house and worked perfectly. The batteries. Tried to warm up with chills. Put on 2 sweaters over a warm house suit. Turned out all the lights in the apartment. The guy left only the little dachshund on and climbed into a chair with his feet. Came up closer to the face of the little picture, so that the picture of the portrait of the little dog became clear and at the same time, as began to blur. That snapshot helped him pull himself together in the most difficult of times. He didn't think it would turn out this way. This was not what he had been preparing for over the years at all, and it was both frightening and infuriating at the same time. John couldn't afford to deviate from the plan, and at the same time he couldn't help but feel that he was making a terrible mistake. That this was all wrong, and even what this man had done, that it wasn't worth the punishment prepared for him, because it will affect not only the one who ruined his life a long time ago, but also innocent people. At the appointed time, the couple went to the train station. They decided to take the intercity bus, although Camille would have preferred to take the train. But Christopher said that the train was bad for his neck, and Camille pretended she didn't care. But she also thought about the fact that with such an age difference, and what awaits her in 10 or 15 years in the course of this war will be quite a grandfather. Mentally, he gave himself a kind of slap for such disrespectful thoughts to his spouse. Camille took her son by the hand, and they walked a little around the station, bought hot chocolate at a kiosk health, and hibernation fox. In it, they bought a bun and painted pigeons. What did the janitor with a broom scold them for? In general, before the departure of the bus had fun. In its warm interior, Camille just leaned back comfortably on the back of the seat and watched the city. All ideas are replaced by the outskirts, where more and more dominated by snow, bad weather. And soon she dozed off. In the sanatorium, Mountain Lake occupied decent territories, and if one climbed to the height of bird's flight, one would think that it was the work of giants playing. Had swept away with the palms of their hands a part of their military forest, but put a doll's house on the spot. And a little farther up the mountain Faith stretched threads and hung on them from a box of walnuts. That's how fragile, miniature from the height looked. Located at the ski slopes elevators for lazy and tired vacationers. "Mom, are you a palace?" asked Stephen, pointing with his pen at the huge sanatorium, which against the background of small one-story houses of the staff and really seemed like a palace. "Aha," Camille replied. She suddenly remembered that she and her husband had not been on vacation since the birth of their son. That carefree feeling of absolute relaxation. Now it seemed as wonderful and unattainable as the possibility of flying to Mars, and we're going to a ball there. Oh, don't talk nonsense. He wrinkled his nose, thinking that he would rather play the role of Cinderella here. It was a friend of her husband, could not humanly, trusting to leave in the city. Another woman with such a simple filly would have taken a chance long ago. She'd have had a lover, or even none, to make her happy, as long as she was young and good-looking. She thankfully kept herself in front of Christopher. And then, lo and behold, he began to bury her slowly. The woman's mood improved a little when she looked at the provided residence. It turned out that the cabin was freshly renovated. There were all the necessary household appliances. No frills, of course, but it was possible to live very well. On the day of arrival, we sorted things out, found out what and where. We also looked in the store working here for locals from staff to guests. And finally, we all had dinner together. And that's a sin. Relaxing. After the road, Camille thought that everything was not so bad, and she thought so until the next day, when together with Christopher, she went to the administration office of the sanatorium. Her husband wanted to clarify something about his work. As the appointed foreman, a solid and decisive person, she was just keeping him company, and at the same time decided to give herself a mini excursion. And suddenly, on one of the paths flying what was to be in the spring and summer, an assortment of flower beds. They met John, "And what are you doing here?" Without hello, and extremely rudely asked him Eve, breathing fresh air and marveling at the purity of the suburban snow, replied mockingly, raising an eyebrow. No, I'm serious. What are you doing here?" "Relaxing." "Are you?" No, that's impossible. "Are you stalking our family?" "Why?" "Interested." "You tell me." "Honey, don't." Camille tried to calm her husband down. "Sorry," turned to her neighbor. "We just didn't expect to see you here. My husband and my family came to work, and we're with our ponytail." "Small world." John shrugged. "Well, congratulations. This is a really great place. Why wouldn't you come here?" "See you later," said, and headed away shamelessly. But the impression he got was one of equanimity. Camille quickly settled into her new place, and she even liked it. Right above the kitchen sink was a window with a view of groves of blue spruce trees, so fiddling with dirty dishes passed under contemplation. The peacefulness of the landscape of the sun noticeably improved appetite, which was not surprising. With the child being able to spend much more time outdoors here than in the city, and the air was really clean, it seemed to have so much oxygen and forest flavor in it that it made you dizzy. True, sometimes my son would persistently start asking where Aunt John was. They were playing so well. Uncle John is funny. He can throw high in the air in his arms and catch it back. Camille answered that Uncle John stayed in town. He had business there. She knew that if she gave her son John's presents away, he would not leave her alone. And even her husband seemed to have calmed down. He immersed himself in his work as if he were younger. When he had a whole team of masons at his disposal, together with whom they gave over the new restaurant saloon, where, according to the owners of Mountain Lake, was to be a real hearth in the manner of the medieval, to roast meat on a spit right in front of the guests. In one of the clear evenings, when it seemed in the transparent sky spilled liquid amber along the horizon, Camille was strolling along the territory of the sanatorium, and suddenly, still from afar, noticed John turn to flood hurriedly back. She lifted the hood of her down jacket, hoping that she would not notice or recognize him. Camille, having noticed, turned around, and in her gaze read a plea to leave. Please, Ostap. I refrain from the temptation to betray my husband. When I'm with you." The man was relentless. "Are you avoiding me?" "No." "Then why aren't we seeing each other? You said it was wrong. Isn't ordinary friendship forbidden? Is that enough for you?" "Am I?" I exhaled a shuddering cloud of vapor and turned away to avoid looking into eyes that were as enchanting as forest lakes. "It's enough for me, but we can at least try somehow. It's okay. We've made peace." And while Paradise, not without pleasure, took him under the arm and went together to the main out of the sanatorium building. "And you were in the winter garden." Camille shook his head negatively. "In the movie theaters, went to the scene in the ice town to go sledding." "Camille, did your husband lock you out of the house?" "No." "Why just a lot of business from Zenit." The woman tried to defend herself, but it came out insecurely as it is not up to it. "I don't feel like it." "That's not good." So not far to depression. But it thoughtfully looked forward and suddenly turned sideways, dragged and resolutely behind him. "We'll fix that. You see me somewhere. I'll show you one unusual place. You're gonna love it. Actually, it's not open yet, but soon it'll be the best choice for those who miss true romance." They entered the building and found themselves in an empty lobby. John and Camille walked to one of the doors and opened it. The man gestured for his companion to enter, flicking the switch. Camille gasped. They found themselves in a hall reminiscent of those seen in historical movies. This is where they would hold dance parties. So beautiful. Camille ran her fingertips over the tires of the white grand piano on the small stage. "Do you like it?" "Very much." "But are we allowed to be here?" The woman walked on, listening to the seemingly melodious tapping of her heels. She took off her down jacket and put it on the table. The room was a little hot. "Why not?" The man approached her with a kind of predatory grace, her heart hammering sweetly with absorbent cotton. Anxious as if to find herself. "I'll cross the hive." There are bees in it, and they can fry. But it also has honey. Does it taste of risk? At times, without exacerbating the experience. She didn't notice as he walked by, lightly pressing a button on some equipment, and soft music flowed from the tall speakers. The sounds of the blues floated in the air, and they seemed to push her into John's arms as he gently embraced her around the waist and took her hand and led her in a dance. "You're so beautiful." Camille forgot how to breathe. Every breath felt like a miracle. All she could see were his eyes. "Are you happy?" She couldn't speak. She shook her head, unable to answer precisely and tell a truth she didn't know. "You are the mother of a wonderful child. But are you worthy of the man you've thought of as your husband all these years?" "What do you mean?" "My time is running out. I must go home. Go far away and never come back. But I met you. Can you stay?" "No, but you can come with me. On you." Stephen. Family together forever. Trust, loyalty, affluence, romance, caring. John spoke of what was absolutely, unquestionably important and necessary. For Camille, every word struck her mind with lightning, and she tried it on for herself and this man. Surely, yet gently leading her in a dance to the magic of the blues. She wasn't thinking of Christopher now. She remembered that she had a husband, a father, and a child. But could she ever think of all that in relation to him? Also foolish. A warm flower blossomed in her heart out of anticipation of happiness. Camille smiled, imagining her and her son, John, resting somewhere on the beach under the palm trees, and Stephen calls him Daddy, and they are immensely happy. A real family. "Wouldn't you agree?" John asked. And suddenly his gaze changed to the more abrupt lords. "You agree. We leave together and forever." Perhaps say the last words for a few moments. Later, they would have had the effect he longed for, but something suddenly seemed to bring Camille out of the complacency of a lazy trance. Almost a flight, when dreams and reality are so closely intertwined that one can do anything to realize dreams. "I haven't decided yet," she replied. "John, I'm in the dance too fast, my legs are tired." He squeezed her hand too tightly. "John, look eye to eye, as if not my orders. Look, listen, and obey." John let go, stopped, and he rekindled the embrace. "This is wrong." Camille slowly pulled away from him, touching the day. It seemed to her that in the man's gaze now, there was not an ounce of love, but something else. Hate is impossible. It's the sun that sends the glare, only. "No need to go." Stephen and the other kids at the playground. "It's time for dinner." "Excuse me, I need to think." "No, I'm sorry. I ran out of the dance hall, picking up my down jacket on the run, throwing it on outside." Christopher. It seemed to Camille that nothing she had ever wished for so passionately as for her husband to be at home now and not to be late at work, where something had to be solved urgently because the schedule of tasks was already being fulfilled somewhat on the wrong track. What was the fault of the suppliers of low-quality materials? So everyone waited for new ones to be ordered. "Camille, what's wrong?" My husband was at home, looking out of the kitchen, looking rather unusual. He was holding a bowl of dough, and we're having apple pie. We wanted to surprise you, didn't we? He smiled. He patted Stephen's temple, who also hurried to show himself to his mother. "Look, what apples, Ma? And where have you been?" "Out for a walk." Camille replied absent-mindedly. "Walking, looking around. Too bad it's not summer. What's wrong with winter? You can make a snowman and go skiing. Son, go wash the apples for the pie." "And I can." I round my eyes, Stephen, for whom not being close to the sink was the ultimate fun. "You know, I think I overreacted to John. He just came into our family's life so unexpectedly, sigh. Okay. I admit I was jealous as a fool. You see, here he is too. Yeah, it's not pretty, but I'll make it up to you, I promise." Camille was about to say she didn't blame her husband. And in general, she personally decided that John is completely unnecessary persona for them, even though he saved his son. But then her husband said something that shocked the woman. Anyway, I had a man-to-man talk with him. We decided that there should be no stupid feud between us. He laughed at what I told him about jealousy. Imagine, he's already got someone else. He said it was secret, an affair, but it'll be out soon. Camille thought Pavel's heart was fine. Could her strong John have said that? But it's disgusting, despicable. So we decided to cement our friendship. Tomorrow we'll go snowmobiling. We'll go as a company. Everyone who works here decided to get some exercise. Right, but I'm joining in. So did John. No. Why not? You said yourself at the beginning that I could be more polite, and Christopher frowned understandingly. It's just that you have tomorrow off, Camille said hurriedly. The reason her husband should have canceled an outing that she found suspicious. What seemed odd? Wrong. We were supposed to go snowballing as a family, but we can do that after lunch. Christopher waved goodbye. Well, let's go bake a pie, wife. Without your instructions, I'm sure I'll end up with breadcrumbs. Or raw dough. The next morning, Camille hurriedly looked out the window, but the sun was shining, and the horizon was covered with low clouds. The weather was perfect for a walk. She didn't know what else to say to dissuade him. There was no way to talk to John to find out what he wanted to accomplish with all of this, and what he even thought about his rejection. Waved goodbye for now. Stephen, when Christopher and John were on their way to the group of men in the crowd near the semi-darkness already on snowmobiles. After seeing them off, Camille decided that perhaps she was exaggerating. Maybe they'd just talk, figure things out, and everything would be all right. John would just be a friend. Naive. Maybe. But I'm sure there's a place for that kind of thing in life. The weather turned so quickly. Here it was not the natural forces of nature, but someone had deliberately driven the sky above the forest. Where people went deep, all the insatiable clouds and winds from many kilometers around. The snow just piled up, but also about the wind gusts circled, its blindness confounding the lace. Do not stand. Keep in line, shouted Joe, the most experienced of the group, who lived in Mountain Lake almost all year round at the post of chief of the place guard. Here, the death would get confused and make a move. The way back amidst the blizzard that had broken up was going to take twice as long at least. So everyone obediently moved on Joe for fear of getting lost in the woods. Christopher Snowmobile sat down for the first time. He hadn't handled it badly in good weather. But now it seemed to him that a moralistic and angry horse was thrashing beneath him. He saw in front of him only vague spots of John, who was riding ahead and was thus second from the tail of the chain. Suddenly, the snowmobile motor on Christopher stalled. He yanked everything he could, but nothing helped. I'm not going, screamed a voice drowned in the howling storm. John slowed down and turned around. The man he'd been looking for so long was walking into his arms, tracked him down yesterday morning and offered him a friendship. It was unexpected. And though the man's hatred for whom John had betrayed all these years no longer had power over him, simply could not have power over him, he felt strange, as if he were half a step away from doing something horribly irreparable, and something inside forgotten and muffled by the vestiges of the marshal's suffering. Don't do it. That Camille had refused was unpleasant to him, humiliating to his ego, but did not at all destroy the plans. It just made it more difficult. More time was needed, and this trip could change a lot of things. But right now, John watched a tiny human figure waving in the distance, and a genuine darkness rose in his heart. Once again, chance was doing him good. He did not touch Christopher's snowmobile. Something in it had broken on its own. It doesn't cost anything. Now just pedal and drive off after the others will throw their Christopher has a chance that his snowmobile really broke down. And that's when John felt hot, dizzy. It was as if nature itself had become his ally together. No one's going to get enough of this man just yet, and then it might be too late. The decision had to be made quickly, but something was in the way. John suddenly realized with horror that he felt a sense of pity. Yes, there was a monster in front of him, a monster from long ago. But why was it so vile to imagine that by his treachery the little boy would lose his father? What would Christopher's wife grieve? Breaking free, John turned the snowmobile abruptly and steered it toward the elders. "What's wrong?" shouted out in a bore. "It won't start." Nodding, John tried to inspect the snowmobile. "It's bad. Come on, get on behind me. We have to hurry. The visibility is getting worse." Christopher obeyed without a second thought, but the moment was lost. The companions ahead dissolved into the snowmelt. The road, the stacked string of snowmobiles, was rapidly coming to a standstill. Suddenly, the wind rushed at the forest with great force, and an old pine tree, whose roots had long ago poked out of the ground when its giant crooked paws crumbled with a creak, nearly perished beneath it and nearly struck its branches. Abruptly it stalled. The men realized that moving forward was impossible. There remained an option to try to go around in a wide arc. But the weather, it seemed that fate itself was determined against both the Avenger and his as yet unsuspecting victim. The snowmobile was traveling along the edge of the ravine, along a narrow strip free of bushes. Suddenly, the strip of snow shuddered and dragged it down behind him. The forest swallowed up the two men with a shriek. Waking up, John let his hands around the emptiness, so not the whole group, and only then opened his eyes. Everything was dancing in front of him. He bumped his head a little. In addition, the blizzard had not subsided. Because he froze, he realized that he lay unconscious for a quarter of an hour at least. Christopher called out, looking around, noticing a dark patch of clothing nearby. Rushed to him, turned him on his back, felt for a pulse, the lying man quietly for the country. Where does anything hurt?" My leg hurts." "Get up, I'll help you." "Can't lie down, can't sleep." Raised upright in the bathtub and supported him. John made it to the snowmobile. They were lucky because they threw him off it before he landed, and unlucky in that the transport flew nose first into a huge boulder. One look was enough to know that it wasn't going to go any further. "We're going to die," whispered him. "No," said John. It was disgusting. Everyone was moving against him. "Let me breathe. Dream on. Let's go." Suddenly, John saw something up ahead. "Come on." After only a short distance, the men found themselves at a small house. It was put up a long time ago and had no owner. It was for anyone who needed a dry and warm shelter in the woods, and this hut continued to be used sometimes by hunters from neighboring villages and sometimes by tourists. That's why dry firewood, matches, lockers, breadcrumbs, groats, and canned food were found in it. Georgia was shocked by what had happened. John hurriedly started a fire. Now, at least they wouldn't be exposed to the cold. When the storm subsided, you could just walk back. And besides, they'll probably be looking for them soon. "Thank you. You saved me. You saved my son." Now here I am thanking him. John looked at him carefully and then burst into hysterical laughter as he continued to laugh. The man slammed his fists on the wall several times. Yes, so much so that he was staggering to the rescue. "It would have been better if you had died in this forest. Who put me up to dragging you, rescuing you? You? What do I hate about you?" He finished with a sharply lowered voice, already vital. At the same time, threateningly, the last phrase sounded that Christopher became very frightened. "Why? What did I do to you?" A blizzard was beating behind the walls. A tire fire hung in the stove. But now it was no longer cozy and peaceful. There was no sense of security. "Why did I save you? You should have gone ahead. You wouldn't have gotten out. What did you do, man? You don't remember. Sure, you just did your job and got paid handsomely for it. And how did that money make you happy? Yes, I see it did. Your kid got married. What was it like for me then? Didn't you think?" John didn't come closer, didn't move, and stood opposite, and said Christopher didn't understand what was happening. But he also felt like he was about to see John standing there. "I don't know what you mean, John. We can just talk." "We can." The man sat down on the floor of the wall and spoke. and what he had said about Gigolo, for Christopher had forgotten long ago, as a nightmare seemed to have been born. Giovanni had said that through hypnosis, Christopher should reprogram Albert's personality, rid him of his obsessive, unrealistic ideas. To make him more obedient was not a fad, but a concern for the child. For otherwise, what future? What problems? His what? Christopher at first hesitated, but the day after the meeting in Greece, Giovanni brought his son, and he looked as if into the void, said that he wanted to undergo a hypnosis session himself. Giovanni had coordinated with Christopher many details about what meaning he should lay of the hypnosis session. It was strange and frightening. Christopher had only tried something like this on adult volunteers before, and then sort of casually, not really believing in it. But now there was a child in front of him, a little boy who looked obediently into his eyes, and the pendulum listened to the report and fell asleep. And while he slept, folding his arms across his chest, Christopher would tell him what he must accept in his life. He had 6 or 8 sessions in all, after which Giovanni handed him the money, thanking him warmly. Left the bath Alonia with a light heart, because before the last session Alberto suddenly spoke and told him just a few words. "You're going to break me, and I'll never forgive you for that. My father is lying." "So you're Alberto," whispered Christopher. The hut felt warm. "It's even hotter. Now you want to hear the truth?" With a smirk, asked the man across the hall. Christopher shook his head negatively. He didn't know what to say and was afraid of what he might hear. If you had been more interested in your client, you would have found out that he was really a mob boss, but you didn't want to find out something that might shake your faith that you were doing the right thing. Do you know how many lives he's taken? And they called him the Black Demon. He was a scary man. John continued the story. Turns out his mother fell in love with a passionate Italian man, not realizing who he was. She thought he was just a businessman. She just couldn't walk away from him. Giovanni wanted to raise his son to be his copy, but the boy did not accept his cruel world, and moreover, once witnessed how his father punishes his enemies. And then he also learned that his father was a member of a mystical order. Giovanni once took Alberto to a meeting, but what he saw did not make him obedient, but only made him even more horrified. So his father decided to resort to hypnosis. He did not trust local specialists, and so the appearance of Christopher Mann from afar was a stroke of luck, especially since his father and grandfather were major figures in his not-so-successful craft. Alberto wouldn't have gone into hypnosis willingly, but Giovanni knew how to persuade people. He said he'd take the dog away, that the animal would suffer, not his son's obedience. And you know what? He took it away anyway. No, the dangerous one died. He was placed on a remote farm. Dad said pet attachment was a weakness, and I shouldn't have any. When my father was gone, it was fortunate. And it happened, luckily, very soon. I got my dog, and we were together for many days. John told of another thing, that he had given up his father's trade. With great difficulty, he managed to make out what money in his father's business was clean. They were retained by her. But to become himself again, he had to go a long way. In an effort to heal, he began to study the psychology of hypnosis himself. And while he was making progress, it was also getting worse. Do you know how many years I lay in clinics in France and Switzerland? All those brains were powerless. Until one day one of them said I needed to face my past. I don't think he meant what I chose to do. But I suddenly realized, what do I need and what do you need? I asked him. He was no longer afraid for himself, for his wife and son, and decided that I would find you closer and destroyed from him, destroying everything you hold dear. And it was easy to start. John blatantly revealed his plans to become a family friend, then seduce Camille and force her into a divorce, help take his son, take him far away, and there abandon him alone, leaving Christopher with a broken heart. And that attack on the street was staged so John could appear as a hero. But knowing that your wife, no matter what I do, she loves you. Lucky you. You know, what's worse? I thought I was gonna throw myself at you the second I saw you, but I refrained. And then when I found out, what? Are you happy? I started thinking that if I did all that, how I'd be better than you. You destroyed me on the spot, and you're gonna help me be the same. Meanwhile, the storm had subsided, the wind had dispersed the clouds of snow and disappeared under the sun. For a while, the men were silent. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Christopher said. It was his turn to speak. He said that there was really no bringing back the past, that what had been done had tormented him for years, and no, that money didn't bring happiness. The business went bust, and the car was totaled in an accident. He was young and didn't see the true nature of things. He realized what he'd done, especially acutely when his son was born. He couldn't imagine anyone doing that to his boy. It was a long, hard conversation. People who met long ago now were opening their souls to each other. They had no secrets from each other. John felt that for the first time, he could be so frankly unafraid to show his real self. Christopher, on the other hand, confided in him more than best friends, told him how he had married. First divorce. They didn't see eye to eye. How you met Camille and believed you'd grow old with her. What are you gonna do now? I asked Christopher, when the last words of the revelation came out, and they were silent for a while. Admit defeat. Defeat. But you won, exclaimed Christopher. How I could not avenge myself. You said yourself a moment ago that there was less hatred in you now that you recognize my family. How did you say it's like a fire dying out in the rain? I'm trying to feed it to keep it alive again, because it's kept me going all this time, because I've decided to stay me, to spite my father and you. But I can't help that. Forgiving myself and not knowing what to do next. To live, Christopher said. Once again, he and John met gazes. The brown eyes, the tired eyes of an older man already hard to not old, and the green eyes of a young man whose reality for the first time in many years was clear from the sea was. How old are you? It's all ahead of you. You're the one who said you had money. You can go anywhere, get married, start a family. Aren't people like me entitled? It was a sincere question John wanted an answer to. I don't have it easy myself, but I think you're the one who most needs to just find people to be there for them. Sure, it won't always be easy, but that's life. Hey, anybody alive? Suddenly, the cabin rumbled. Did they really find the missing? No sooner had the disturbing news traveled around the sanitariums than Christopher and John returned. Camille ran to the car, feeling the ground beneath her feet. More news that Borgia had thrown up two of them, a man from the company that had come to the woods. She spoke to Emily, who got the information from her programmer detective, and informed her sister that John is not who he says he is. Rick turns out he is a broker and businessman who was not born in this town at all, although his mother was from this country. It also turned out that Rick was a strange guy. It felt like he was wandering the world, never staying anywhere. For a long time, Rick knew that John was deliberately gathering information about his sister Emily, about the whole family. Camille hugged her husband tightly. Christopher, there's something to talk about. She nodded to the real John nearby. You know, I need to talk to you too, said Christopher. John called out to his wife's dismay. I think it's time to reveal things as they are. Looked carefully at his wife, and there you decide for yourself, sweetheart, how to treat me. Stephen was sent for a walk in the yard for the duration of the conversation. Camille made tea, but no one would touch it. She couldn't believe that the story was the plot of some thriller about her husband's past. It was scary, unimaginable, but there was still the present, in which Christopher received forgiveness, which could no longer hope for another man. As I wanted to believe, finally threw off the weight of hatred from his soul, let go of the past, and could move on. And Camille also realized that she didn't really love John at all. It was a crush. It was reinforced by some kind of hypnosis. Naturally, the woman was hurt, but in the face of the fact that her husband was saved, it's despicable. The main thing is that everything is clear. I have to go, said John, rising. And to where? Camille asked. I don't know, somewhere where I can be alone. Australia and India, maybe. I haven't decided yet. May I? He asked gently. You will convey my apologies to Emily. I don't think she'll forgive me, but I will anyway. Camille nodded. She also took a notebook and wrote quickly. Here's her phone number. She won't change it. I think it brings her luck. John looked surprised at the note, took Christopher, suddenly went out into the yard, and in about 10 minutes returned with Stephen. The boy, to whom his father was quietly explaining something, had a sad look on his face. Uncle John, you are going away. When will you be back? John was confused. He didn't dare ask permission to say goodbye to the child he had grown attached to. What he applied to Stephen, his skills, was never out of malice. He just somehow immediately sensed the boy's problems and slowly began to correct them. Saying the right words slowly made him more courageous, getting rid of his reticence and indecisiveness. I don't know myself for sure, I won't forget. Stroked Stephen on the head when Stephen finally left. Christopher and Camille sat in silence for a long time. The short winter day soon slipped toward sunset. A message came from John that he had left for India, and he was already at the airport. Yes, that's how life had turned out, she sighed. Why did I give him Emily's phone number? What about now that it's all cleared up? I mean, he's not a bad guy. She should stop clubbing. Let her get her own life together. You can't be serious, honey. Who knows? At least I did what I thought I did. Camille was right. When the new day came, a really clear, cloudless, crystal clear, frosty day, in which the snowbirds and Christopher, Camille and Stephen were spread out on the branches around the sanatorium. For the first time in many months, they all felt happy together. It was as if they had turned over a new leaf in their lives. Far away, in hot India, green eyes. The man stood on the balcony and looked out over the jungle. He had a lot to think about. He was truly free for the first time. He also remembered seeing a beagle puppy in a store window nearby. Smiling, John walked resolutely out of the hotel. It was time to get a loyal friend, 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 a loyal friend.